All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We love diving deep into books and ideas that really shift perspectives, and today's topic is no exception. This one came straight from your suggestions, actually. You mentioned you're really interested in understanding how innovation happens, especially when the way forward is kind of murky, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's something I've been wrestling with a lot lately.
Well, I think we've got a framework that might help. We're going to be exploring the power of little bets, which is the central idea in Peter Sims's book, Little Bets, how breakthrough ideas emerge from small discoveries. It's all about how those big, groundbreaking innovations we often hear about don't just appear out of thin air. They're actually the result of a much more iterative process, a series of smaller, more manageable steps that allow for learning and adaptation along the way.
So instead of trying to come up with that one perfect game-changing idea right out of the gate, you're suggesting it's more about making these smaller, less risky moves and seeing where they lead.
Precisely. It's less about predicting the future and more about actively experimenting your way into it, as Sims puts it. And the cool thing is, you mentioned wanting to really understand this without getting bogged down in too much detail, and that's our aim here. We're going to focus on the key insights from little bets and use some really compelling real-world examples to bring it to life. We'll unpack what exactly a little bet is and why they're so powerful when it comes to innovation. Then we'll get into this idea of failing forward, how shifting our perspective on mistakes can actually help us move forward faster.
That's an interesting concept. I'm definitely guilty of seeing mistakes as something to avoid at all costs, which I guess can be pretty limiting.
For sure. We'll also delve into the critical role of experimentation and how to manage risk in this context. And we'll explore the link between little bets and creativity, how this approach can help us tap into that more intuitive, playful part of ourselves where those truly original ideas come from. And then we'll talk about iteration, the continuous process of refining and improving based on what we learn along the way.
So it's not a one-and-done thing. It's about constantly tweaking and adapting as you go.
Absolutely. We'll also dig into how to really extract the most valuable learnings from those inevitable setbacks and how collaboration and bringing in diverse perspectives can supercharge this whole process. Okay, ready to dive in?
I'm all ears.
Great. So, first things first, let's define what exactly a little bet is.
All right, so in essence, a little bet is any concrete action you take to explore, test, or develop an idea. It's a tangible step forward, but the key is that it's manageable, meaning it doesn't require a huge investment of time, money, or resources up front. And importantly, it generates information that informs your next step.
So it's like dipping your toe in the water before jumping in head first. You're getting a feel for the temperature, the current, gathering data to see if it's even worth diving in.
Yeah, exactly. It's about reducing risk and uncertainty by taking a calculated, incremental approach. Now, Sims contrasts these little bets with what he calls big bets.
Right, those big all-in decisions where you're putting a lot on the line.
Exactly. And while big bets definitely have their place, especially when you have a high degree of confidence in an opportunity, little bets are really essential for the early stages of exploration. They allow you to probe, to experiment, to see what works and what doesn't without committing a ton of resources up front. Sims argues that many seemingly brilliant ideas, when they first encounter the complexities of the real world, well, they often reveal flaws that weren't apparent in that initial brainstorming session. Little bets help you uncover those early on and make adjustments accordingly.
It's so true. I think we all have those moments where we're like, this is $1 million idea, and then reality sets in, and it's like,
Right.
okay, maybe not.
Right, exactly. And that's where this little bets mindset really comes in handy. It's about being willing to test those assumptions, to get feedback, and to adapt based on what you learn. And Sims uses some really powerful examples in the book to illustrate this, right?
Yeah, totally. Like the story of Google. Google didn't start out as the global search giant it is today. It actually began as a much more focused project by Larry Page and Sergey Brin aimed at improving library searches. It was through a series of small experiments and iterative improvements driven by user feedback that they stumbled upon their revolutionary approach to organizing information and ultimately their entire business model. They were essentially tackling a specific problem with small, testable solutions, and it was through those small wins that they eventually achieved a massive impact.
Yeah, I mean, who knew that optimizing library searches would lead to, well, everything Google does now?
Right. It's amazing. And another great example is Pixar. They started out focusing on hardware, if you can believe it.
That's right. Pixar initially struggled to find commercial success with its high-end graphics hardware. But then Steve Jobs, he had this brilliant insight. He allowed a small animation team within the company to pursue these short film projects. And these shorts, they were essentially affordable losses, small bets in the grand scheme of things. What nobody anticipated, not even someone as visionary as Jobs, was that these little experiments in animation would not only showcase the power of their technology, but also lay the foundation for their eventual dominance in feature-length digital animation, which was a completely new art form at the time.
It's like those small bets, they opened up this whole new universe of possibilities that nobody could have foreseen.
Exactly. And it highlights how even those entrepreneurs who seem to have these game-changing ideas from the get-go, well, they often find that they need to adapt and evolve based on those early explorations.
Okay, so we're starting to see how these small exploratory steps can lead to unexpected breakthroughs.
Hmm.
But I think for many people, a huge hurdle is how to deal with those inevitable setbacks. Sims talks about the idea of failing forward, which I think is such a powerful concept. What are the keys to making that mindset shift?
Failing forward really boils down to reframing how we view mistakes. It's about moving away from seeing them as these negative outcomes to be avoided at all costs and instead recognizing their inherent value as learning opportunities.
Easier said than done, right?
Oh, for sure. I think our traditional education systems kind of accidentally train us to fear failure because so much emphasis is placed on getting the right answer. And that can create this mindset where we're hesitant to experiment, to take risks, to try something new for fear of messing up. But the key is to design your little bets in a way that even if they don't go exactly as planned, the cost is relatively low, but the learning potential is high.
So you're maximizing the information you gain from each bet, regardless of the outcome.
Exactly. And to really internalize this, Sims draws on Carol Dweck's work on fixed versus growth mindsets.
Oh yeah, that's a classic. It's all about whether you believe your abilities are set in stone or whether they can be developed through effort and learning.
Right. So with a fixed mindset, you tend to believe that your intelligence and talents are basically innate and unchangeable. People with this mindset often feel this constant need to prove their competence, and they're quick to blame external factors or a lack of inherent ability when things go wrong. Sims actually uses John McEnroe, the tennis star, as an example.
Oh yeah, his famous on-court outbursts.
Exactly. McEnroe would often lash out at umpires or lines judges when things weren't going his way. It was this external focus rather than an internal focus on growth and improvement.
And that contrasts with a growth mindset, where you believe that your abilities can be developed through dedication, effort, and learning from experience, including those inevitable mistakes.
Right. People with a growth mindset see failures not as evidence of inadequacy, but as opportunities for learning and improvement. They're constantly striving to get better, to refine their skills, to expand their knowledge. A great example of this is Michael Jordan.
The ultimate comeback king.
Right. Despite not making his high school varsity basketball team initially, Jordan used that setback as motivation to work even harder, and he ultimately became, well, one of the greatest basketball players of all time.
I love that example because it shows that even the most talented individuals face setbacks. But it's how they respond to those setbacks that really makes the difference.
And the really encouraging thing about Dweck's research is that it suggests most of us have a mix of both mindsets. And the good news is that a growth mindset can be cultivated. It starts with self-awareness, paying attention to how you react to challenges and setbacks, and then consciously choosing to reframe those situations as learning opportunities rather than as judgments of your inherent capabilities. Think of it like learning a new language. Someone with a fixed mindset might get discouraged after a few mistakes and think, oh, I'm just not good at languages. But someone with a growth mindset will see those mistakes as a natural part of the learning process and keep practicing.
That makes so much sense. And I think this ability to fail forward, to embrace those missteps as part of the journey, is so essential for creativity, isn't it?
It's absolutely crucial because if you're constantly afraid of making a mistake, you're far less likely to try something new, to push the boundaries, to explore those uncharted territories where truly innovative ideas often reside.
So little bets become a practical way to embody this growth mindset. They're like these low-stakes experiments that allow you to test your assumptions and gather valuable data without the fear of catastrophic consequences.
Right. They give you the freedom to explore and iterate without the pressure of betting the farm on every single idea.
And that brings us nicely to the role of experimentation and how little bets can facilitate that.
Yes. Little bets are, by their very nature, experiments. They're low-cost and low-risk ways to test your hypotheses in the real world to see how people actually respond to your ideas. Because, as Jeff Bezos has famously said, you can't predict human behavior in a spreadsheet.
And Amazon's approach to innovation really embodies this principle of experimentation, right? The idea of planting seeds.
Absolutely. Instead of relying solely on extensive market research and financial projections, Amazon adopts this much more exploratory approach. They're constantly planting seeds, making small, relatively inexpensive investments in a wide range of initiatives, and then seeing which ones gain traction with customers. A great example of this is the contrast between their early customer purchase history comparison feature, which ultimately didn't succeed, and the phenomenal success of their associates program.
So they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. They're spreading those bets around and seeing what takes root.
Exactly. And it highlights that even for a company like Amazon, with all its resources and data, it's still impossible to predict with certainty which ideas will resonate with customers. So they experiment broadly and adapt based on those real-world results.
I love that. It's like a portfolio approach to innovation. And it's interesting that Sims brings in Sarasvathi's research on expert entrepreneurs in this context.
Yes, Saraswati's work offers this fascinating perspective on how successful entrepreneurs navigate uncertainty. Her research suggests that they tend to focus more on what they are willing to lose if a venture doesn't pan out, rather than solely on calculating the potential gains. It's this idea of affordable loss, which essentially shifts the focus from trying to predict the future, which is inherently unpredictable, to managing potential downsides in the present.
So instead of asking what's the best case scenario, they're asking what's the worst case scenario and can I live with that?
Precisely. And the Pixar example we discussed earlier aligns perfectly with this. Their early short films were essentially affordable losses that unexpectedly opened up this whole new avenue for success.
It's like those small bets. They weren't even aiming for that particular target, but they hit a bullseye nonetheless.
It just goes to show that sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from those unexpected places.
And this whole idea of experimentation, I think it's so intrinsically linked to creativity. It's like little bets. They unlock this more intuitive, playful part of our thinking that can get stifled by those more rigid top-down approaches.
Absolutely. Sims argues that little bets are fundamental to unleashing our innate creativity, which unfortunately can often be educated out of us, as Sir Ken Robinson, the education expert, has pointed out.
Yeah, that emphasis on standardized testing and rote memorization.
Exactly. Those approaches can stifle our natural curiosity and our willingness to experiment and make mistakes, which are all crucial for fostering creativity.
It's like we're taught to color within the lines, but the real magic happens when you start coloring outside of them.
And that's where little bets come in. They provide this framework for reclaiming that playful experimental spirit we often had as children.
And it brings to mind that great quote from Alan Kay. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. And it seems like little bets are a key tool in this invention process.
Absolutely. By actively experimenting and learning from those experiments, we're not just sitting back and waiting to see what happens, we're shaping those possibilities.
So we're not just passengers on this journey, we're the drivers.
Exactly. And a really vital part of this whole process is iteration. It's not just about making a small bet and seeing what happens in isolation. It's about continuously refining and developing your ideas based on the feedback and learnings you gather along the way.
So it's this constant loop of trying things, seeing what works, and making adjustments.
Precisely. The little bets methodology is all about taking action, observing the results, learning from them, and then using those learnings to inform your next move. Ideas rarely emerge fully formed. They evolve and improve incrementally over time, shaped by those insights gleaned from each small experiment. Think of it like a scientific process of discovery, but on a micro level.
And Chris Rock's approach to developing his comedy routines is such a brilliant example of this iterative process in action.
Yeah, it's fascinating. His incredibly successful HBO specials and global tours, they're not just the result of him sitting down and writing a perfect routine in isolation. They're meticulously crafted through countless small bets, individual jokes, premises, delivery styles tested and refined in front of live audiences night after night.
It's like each performance is a mini experiment.
Exactly. And those jokes that don't land, those awkward silences, they're just as valuable as the laughs because they provide crucial feedback that informs what works and what doesn't. He's constantly iterating, tweaking, sometimes completely discarding material based on those real-time audience reactions.
So he's embracing those failures as valuable data points.
Exactly. And this iterative approach isn't limited to the performing arts. We see it in other creative fields as well, like architecture. Frank Gehry, for example, is famous for using rough, inexpensive physical models to rapidly explore a wide array of design concepts before committing to a final design.
So he's not starting with those detailed blueprints. He's starting with something much more tactile and experimental.
Right. He'll often use simple materials like paper and cardboard to create these low-fidelity prototypes that allow him to quickly visualize and evaluate a multitude of possibilities. This allows for rapid iteration and exploration before investing significant resources in more detailed and expensive designs.
It's like he's sketching in 3 dimensions.
Exactly. And it highlights the power of failing cheaply and learning quickly through those early iterations.
So iteration is this continuous feedback loop of trying things out, getting feedback, and refining based on what you learn. And a crucial aspect of this feedback loop is how we approach learning from failure.
Right. And the key principle here is to fail quickly to learn fast. By creating low-cost, rough versions of your ideas, prototypes, pilot programs, initial sketches, you can identify what doesn't work much earlier in the process before you've invested too much time, money, or emotional energy.
And Andrew Stanton, the director at Pixar, has this great quote about this mindset. He says, their guiding principle is to be wrong as fast as we can.
I love that quote. It's so counterintuitive, but it makes so much sense.
Right. It's about embracing the inevitability of mistakes and actively trying to identify them early on so you can course correct and move towards a better solution more quickly.
He actually compares it to the process of growing up. You can't reach adulthood without going through those often awkward and messy stages of adolescence.
It's all part of the journey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the book emphasizes the importance of getting honest feedback on those early, rough prototypes.
Why is that so important?
Well, people tend to be more willing to give candid feedback when they see an idea in its early, raw form. They're less likely to hold back because they don't feel like they're criticizing something the creator has already poured their heart and soul into.
It's less intimidating to critique a sketch than a finished masterpiece.
Exactly. And from the creator's perspective, they're also less emotionally attached to those early ideas, so they're more receptive to constructive criticism and more willing to pivot or even completely scrap an approach that's not working.
So it creates this more open and honest feedback loop.
Precisely. And this whole process of making little bets, learning from failures, and iterating, it's amplified when you bring in other people and their unique perspectives. So collaboration is a key ingredient here.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the power of collaboration. So how does that specifically play into the little bets framework?
Well, Sims highlights this concept of plussing at Pixar, which is a fantastic example of how to build upon ideas in a collaborative and constructive way. It's inspired by principles from improv theater, where the focus is on accepting every offer and making your partner look good. The key is to add to the idea, to refine it collaboratively, rather than shutting it down with criticism.
So instead of saying no, but,
Yeah.
you're saying yes and.
Exactly. It's about building on each other's ideas rather than negating them.
And how do those diverse perspectives that come from collaboration contribute to the process of making little bets and driving innovation?
When you bring together people with different backgrounds, experiences, and ways of thinking, you get this incredibly rich tapestry of perspectives. They might spot potential pitfalls you haven't considered, suggest novel approaches you wouldn't have thought of on your own, or see connections between your work and seemingly unrelated fields. It's like this cross-pollination of ideas that can spark truly innovative solutions.
So it's not just about the individual insights from each person, but about the synergy that happens when those perspectives collide.
Exactly. It's like 1 + 1 = 3.
I love that.
Right.
And it brings us to this idea that those small wins, those incremental improvements that come from each little bet, they can accumulate over time and lead to massive outcomes. Sims refers to this as small wins add up to big gains.
Right. It's not always about that one eureka moment. It's often about the consistent, persistent effort of making those small bets and learning from them. The evolution of Starbucks is a great example of this.
Yeah, they didn't start out as the global coffee giant they are today.
Exactly. Their growth was driven by this continuous process of listening to customer feedback and making small, incremental adjustments to their offerings and their business model. Even something as seemingly minor as offering non-fat milk as an alternative turned out to be a huge success because it addressed a real customer need.
It's a reminder that sometimes those seemingly small things can make a big difference.
And the key takeaway is that these small wins and the insights they generate often can't be planned for in advance. They emerge organically through that process of experimentation and iteration.
So for someone listening who might be wrestling with a complex challenge or trying to get a creative project off the ground, the key message seems to be don't get hung up on having all the answers up front or coming up with this perfect bulletproof plan. It's more about taking those small, manageable steps, being curious, and embracing the learning that comes from every experience, even the setbacks.
Yeah, those setbacks are often our greatest teachers.
Absolutely. And it all comes back to that idea of inventing the future through these small, concrete actions.
By making those little bets, we're actively shaping the possibilities rather than passively waiting to see what happens.
Well, this has been a truly insightful dive into Peter Sims's Little Bets. It's such a practical and empowering framework for approaching innovation and problem solving. And here's a final thought for our listeners. Think about a challenge you're currently facing. What's one little bet you can make today? A small, achievable action to start exploring a potential solution or a new direction. And how can you reframe those inevitable setbacks not as failures, but as valuable data points guiding you forward? Remember, innovation often happens not in giant leaps, but in those small, persistent steps. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.